When war broke out, the world changed almost overnight. Suddenly, the simple act of feeding a family became a monumental challenge. Ships that once carried food across the oceans were now needed for troops and supplies, or worse, they were targets. In Britain, we relied heavily on imported food, and the threat of starvation was very real. The government knew it couldn't solve this problem alone. It needed everyone to help. So they called upon ordinary people to turn every spare patch of earth into a source of food. This was the birth of the Victory Garden. It was a powerful idea, simple and direct. Your garden was no longer just a place for pretty flowers or a tidy lawn. It became a front line in the battle for survival. Lawns were dug up, flower beds were repurposed, even small window boxes were called into service. Propaganda posters appeared everywhere with slogans like "Dig for Victory." They weren't just asking, they were inspiring a nation to pick up a spade and a fork. This was a war that could be fought with soil under your fingernails. It was a way for everyone, from children to the elderly, to contribute to the war effort. Every single carrot pulled from the ground was a small victory against the enemy. The scale of this movement was truly astonishing. It wasn't just about individual backyards. Public parks, sports fields, and even the lawns outside famous landmarks were transformed. In London, the moat of the Tower of London was filled with vegetable plots. In the United States, similar initiatives took hold, with millions of families creating their own victory gardens. People who had never grown anything in their lives were suddenly learning how to nurture seedlings and harvest crops. It was a national effort, a shared mission that brought a sense of purpose during a time of great uncertainty and fear. This transformation was about more than just food. It was about resilience. It gave people a sense of control when everything else felt chaotic. Tending to a garden provided a connection to the earth and the rhythm of the seasons, a welcome distraction from the grim news of war. It taught a generation about self-sufficiency and the real value of food. The humble vegetable patch became a symbol of hope and determination. It proved that even in the darkest of times, ordinary people could cultivate life and provide for themselves and their communities, one row of potatoes at a time. This was a quiet green revolution. Gardeners during the war were incredibly resourceful. They didn't have access to modern chemicals or endless supplies from a garden center. They had to rely on clever, age-old techniques to get the most out of their small plots. One of the most effective strategies was companion planting or intercropping. This is the simple but brilliant idea of growing different plants together for their mutual benefit. It's like creating a small, helpful community right there in your vegetable bed. Certain plants can help deter pests from their neighbors, while others can improve soil health or even enhance the flavor of the crops growing nearby. A classic example of this is the Three Sisters method, a technique borrowed from Native American agriculture. Gardeners would plant corn, beans, and squash together. The tall corn stalks would provide a natural trellis for the climbing beans to grow up. The beans, in turn, would draw nitrogen from the air and fix it in the soil, providing essential nutrients for the heavy-feeding corn and squash. Meanwhile, the large, sprawling leaves of the squash would shade the ground, which helped to keep the soil moist and suppress the growth of weeds. It's a perfect, self-sustaining system where each plant supports the others. This principle was applied in many other ways. Strong-smelling herbs like mint or rosemary were often planted near cabbages to confuse and repel the cabbage-white butterfly, whose caterpillars could decimate a crop. Marigolds were another popular choice, planted alongside tomatoes to deter harmful nematodes in the soil. Onions and carrots were grown in alternating rows because the scent of the onions helped to mask the smell of the carrots, making it harder for the destructive carrot fly to find its target. These weren't just old wives' tales. They were practical, effective methods for protecting precious food without resorting to chemicals. Today, this wisdom is more relevant than ever. In our own gardens, whether it's a large allotment or a few pots on a balcony, we can use companion planting to create a healthier, more productive space. Try planting basil next to your tomatoes. It's said to improve their flavor and repel some pests. Plant some nasturtiums as a trap crop for aphids, luring them away from your beans. By thinking of our plants as a community rather than just individual crops, we can encourage a natural balance. It reduces the need for pesticides and creates a more resilient and beautiful garden, just as it did all those years ago. Space was at a premium during the war. Many victory gardens were created in tiny backyards, on small balconies, or in narrow city alleyways. To make the most of every square inch of soil, gardeners had to think creatively. One of the most important strategies was vertical gardening. Instead of letting plants sprawl across the ground, they encouraged them to grow upwards. This meant that even the smallest garden could produce a surprising amount of food. It was a simple solution that maximized the harvest by using the vertical space that is so often overlooked in a garden. Climbing plants were the heroes of the vertical garden. Runner beans, climbing peas, and certain varieties of squash and cucumber were trained up simple structures. These supports were often made from whatever materials were available. Bamboo canes, long branches pruned from trees, or even strings running down from a windowsill were used to create trellises. A wigwam of sticks could support a dozen bean plants in a space that would otherwise only fit one or two bush varieties. This method not only saved precious ground space for other crops like potatoes and cabbages, but it also made harvesting easier and improved air circulation around the plants, which helped to prevent disease. Another crucial technique was succession planting. The goal was to have something to harvest throughout the entire growing season with no gaps. A victory gardener would never leave a patch of soil empty for long. As soon as one crop was harvested, another would be planted in its place. For example, after the early potatoes were dug up in early summer, the same patch of ground would be immediately replanted with quick-growing crops like lettuce, radishes, or spinach for an autumn harvest. This continuous cycle ensured a steady supply of fresh food for the family table from spring right through to winter. We can easily adopt these ideas today. If you have a small garden or a balcony, think vertically. Install a trellis against a sunny wall for tomatoes, cucumbers, or beans. Use hanging baskets for strawberries or trailing herbs. Succession planting is just as useful now. Don't just plant everything in one go in the spring. Sow a short row of carrots or beetroot every few weeks. As you harvest your spring lettuces, pop in some young kale or chard plants. By keeping your soil constantly working, you can dramatically increase your yield and enjoy fresh homegrown produce for many months of the year, making your small space incredibly productive. A productive garden starts with healthy soil. Wartime gardeners understood this fundamental truth. They couldn't just pop down to the shop for a bag of commercial fertilizer, you know. They had to make their own. Composting was an essential skill, turning kitchen scraps and garden waste into what they called black gold. Every potato peeling, every cabbage leaf, and every tea bag was saved and added to the compost heap. This process of decomposition created a rich, nutrient-dense material that could be dug back into the garden beds to feed the soil and nourish the plants. Nothing was wasted. Everything was part of a cycle. One particularly clever method was direct in-ground composting, sometimes called trench composting. Gardeners would dig a trench in a vacant part of the garden and fill it with kitchen scraps and other organic waste over a period of weeks. Once filled, the trench was covered back over with soil. They would then plant crops like hungry cabbages or marrows on top of the covered trench a few months later. As the organic matter decomposed underground, it released a slow and steady supply of nutrients directly to the plant's roots, exactly where they were needed. It was a simple, efficient way to feed the soil and dispose of waste at the same time. Beyond feeding the soil, gardeners also found ingenious ways to extend the short British growing season. They needed to start plants early in the spring and protect them from the first frosts of autumn to maximize their harvest. They built their own mini greenhouses, known as cold frames, using old wooden boxes and salvaged window panes. These simple structures would capture the sun's heat, creating a warmer microclimate inside. This allowed them to sow seeds weeks earlier than they could in the open ground and protect tender plants like tomatoes and peppers, giving them a vital head start on the season. These lessons are just as practical for us today. Start a compost bin. It's the single best thing you can do for your garden and the environment. You can even try trench composting if you have the space. A simple cold frame can be made easily from reclaimed materials, and it will make a huge difference to your growing season. Another simple trick is to use cloches. In the war, they used large glass jars. Today, you can simply cut the bottom off a large plastic bottle and place it over a young plant to protect it from cold winds and late frosts. These simple, low-cost techniques show us how to work with nature to get more from our gardens. The Victory Garden movement was not just about what happened in private backyards. It was a powerful community effort. The spirit of shared purpose was one of its greatest strengths. Allotments, which were already a feature of British life, expanded dramatically. Councils made more land available, and waiting lists grew as people clamoured for a space to grow their own food. These plots became vibrant hubs of activity, where people from all walks of life worked side by side. They shared seeds, tools, and, most importantly, knowledge. An experienced gardener would happily show a novice how to sow seeds or deal with a pest problem. This sense of community extended beyond the formal allotment sites. Neighbours would often collaborate, turning a shared alleyway or a patch of forgotten wasteland into a productive garden. In cities, community gardens sprang up in the most unlikely of places. The beautifully manicured lawns of public parks and the grounds of stately homes were ploughed up and turned over to food production. This was a hugely symbolic act. It showed that in a time of national crisis, providing food for the people was more important than ornamental beauty. These gardens became places where people could gather, work together, and feel a sense of solidarity. Working in these shared gardens did wonders for public morale. In a world dominated by anxiety and the constant threat of bad news, gardening offered a positive and tangible focus. It was a healthy, outdoor activity that provided both physical exercise and mental relief. The simple act of nurturing a plant from a tiny seed to a mature vegetable gave people a sense of achievement and hope. It was a reminder that life continues, that the seasons turn, and that hard work can bring a rewarding harvest. Friendships were forged over rows of cabbages, and a strong sense of community spirit was cultivated along with the vegetables. This community aspect is something we can and should recreate today. Community gardens are springing up in cities and towns all over the world, transforming derelict spaces into green, productive oases. They bring people together, break down social barriers, and provide access to fresh, healthy food. If there isn't one near you, why not start one? All it takes is a small group of enthusiastic people and a neglected piece of land. The lessons from the Victory Gardens show us that when people work together with a shared goal, they can achieve incredible things, greening their communities and strengthening their social bonds in the process. The Victory Gardens of the Second World War were a response to a crisis, but the lessons they teach us are timeless. They remind us that the ability to grow our own food is a powerful tool for resilience. In a world facing new challenges, from climate change to disruptions in global supply chains, these old skills are becoming essential once again. The simple, resourceful techniques used by wartime gardeners show us that we don't need expensive equipment or a huge amount of space to provide for ourselves. We just need a little bit of soil, a few seeds, and a willingness to learn from the past. The core principles of companion planting, succession planting, and vertical gardening are just as effective now as they were then. They are the foundations of sustainable organic gardening. By working with nature instead of against it, we can create gardens that are productive, healthy, and kind to the environment. Building healthy soil through composting is not just a thrifty trick from the past. It is a fundamental part of regenerative agriculture that helps lock carbon in the ground. These are not just gardening tips, they are strategies for a more secure and sustainable future, one small garden at a time. More than anything, the story of the Victory Gardens is a story of empowerment. It shows what ordinary people can achieve when they come together. It proved that small individual actions can have a massive collective impact. During the war, it is estimated that homegrown food from Victory Gardens and allotments made up a significant portion of the nation's diet, easing the strain on official supplies and improving nutrition. This was a victory won not by soldiers, but by millions of gardeners armed with spades and watering cans. It's a powerful reminder of our own capacity to make a difference. So, I encourage you to take these lessons to heart. Look at that small patch of lawn, that empty balcony, or that sunny windowsill with new eyes. See it not as it is, but as it could be, a source of fresh food, a place of connection with nature, and your own small contribution to a more resilient world. You don't have to dig up your entire garden overnight. Start small. Plant a pot of herbs, grow some salad leaves in a window box, try planting some beans up a cane. The spirit of the Victory Garden is not about perfection. It's about getting started. It's about digging for your own small victory.